Okay, recording has started and I'm muting.
Okay, what I want to talk to you about is growth beyond cities, or how do we get better economic growth in rural Ontario? And the starting place for this is to think of rural Ontario as something that's far more complex than the usual urban belief that rural areas are all the same. So rural is more than not urban. There's lots of different kinds of rural Ontarios, and if you drive around the province, which takes a long time, you can see that. But it's easy to think that not much is changing in rural Ontario, because when you drive down the highway, it looks pretty much like it did 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But in reality, rural Ontario is going through a lot of changes. And a lot of those changes are induced or perhaps not helped as much as they could be by the provincial government and its policy choices. So it's important that the provincial government think hard about what kind of policies it puts in place and their implications for the rural parts of the province. Okay, so what? So it's not urban, and there's lots of different places in Ontario, but what does that mean? It really means that there's a weak economy. It means that there's fewer jobs, there's less taxes paid, there's higher transfer payments for about 20% of the population. And that's a burden for the entire province, but perhaps more importantly, is that rural people and the communities they live in want to have a better life. And they should largely be responsible for working to achieve it. But the provincial government should be able to help them, just like it helps in cities. In cities, it provides public transit support, it provides museums and art galleries, and lots of amenities that are there largely for urban people. But it doesn't provide the same sort of things in rural areas, and it shouldn't. It should provide different things. And perhaps truly compelling reason for why the provincial government has to be involved is because it owns pretty much all of rural Ontario, especially in the north, with the Crown lands. So what are the highlights of this? Well, there's a lot of research, and I've worked for the OECD for the last 20 years on the rural group, and there's a bunch of analysis that shows there are a lot of prosperous rural places. And those prosperous rural places, while they're individually small, provide a good quality of life for the people who live there. But because there's a lot of them, there's a cumulative effect that's significant at the provincial level. So if you can get all of the small towns and small villages in rural Ontario performing 10% better, that will add a significant amount to the provincial economy. And what does the province have? What does the province play? Well, it plays the same types of roles it plays in cities. Public services, infrastructure, business development support, but in very different ways, because small town economies don't work the same way that large city economies. And most importantly, the different parts of rural Ontario need somewhat different approaches. So what's needed is what's called a territorially sensitive approach, something that recognizes the different types of rural Ontarios. And I proposed a typology in the paper that looks like the rural Ontario that I understand. Might not be the rural Ontario that you understand, but it's certainly important to begin that discussion about what types of rural Ontario there are and what types of things the government and the people in those communities need to do. Okay, so what's the policy implication for this? The first thing is that rural communities have to stop waiting for things to get better, both individually and collectively. They have to organize within the community to try and figure out a role for themselves, what they want to be and how they're going to become that. And they have to organize collectively to lobby the provincial government to be aware of what's going on. After all, you're 20% of the population, and 20% of the population is a significant group of people, particularly if you have a shared interest. And most importantly, the province has to start thinking beyond urban boundaries. And it's got to think about the whole geography of Ontario, its responsibilities to rural people, and most importantly, what does its role in managing Crown land mean for the people who live in rural areas? Thank you. Okay, I'm done.